Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Virtually Golden. My name's Annie, and I work with Golden United. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to ask the presenter. You'll see that there is a little mute button on the bottom left corner of your screen that looks like a microphone. You can just click that when you want to ask a question and click it again when you're done. You can also feel free to use the chat feature if you want to send a message to everybody in the group. And other than that, I'm going to hand it over to Kathy Smith, who's spearheading our Virtually Golden sessions today.
Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to present Barb Warden, who's going to give us her third in a fourth-part series about Golden history. Barb runs the website goldentoday.com and is the author of the daily email, What's Happening in Golden, which often delves into obscure aspects of Golden history. For her work with the site, she has received the Golden Chambers Civic Award, the Golden Mayor's Award, and the Golden Landmarks Association's Living Landmarks Award. And if you don't get this email every morning, you might want to go to goldentoday.com and give it a try. For her work with, she is also part of the past president of Leadership Golden and one of the founders of the Golden Beer Talks. She is the author of 3 books about Golden, including Funiculars of Golden. She teaches a Golden history class through OLLI and is a frequent guest lecturer and tour guide on Golden history topics. And today she is going to be telling us about the first half of the 20th century, transportation, tourism, and 2 world wars. Take it away, Barb.
Thanks, Kathy. Hello, everyone. As Annie said, just feel free to interrupt me anytime with questions. So I'm going to do a quick review of what I've talked about in the first 2 sessions with the 19th century. The things that Golden had going for us by the beginning of the 20th century are that although we were no longer the territorial capital, we were the county seat for Jefferson County, which brought quite a few people to town. We had a railroad that had come here in 1870 and transformed the town and made us much bigger, more industrial. It gave us an economy, basically. Coors joined us in 1873, so they were a major employer. And School of Mines joined us in approximately 1873, and they were also a major employer. Golden was a substantial trading town. People from miles around came here to do their shopping. And we had many industries, which again, were good for our economy. Then, one thing that happened before the end of the 19th century was that we got our first interurban railroad, and that was a passenger, well, pretty much passenger-only railroad that went from Denver to Golden. And although we already had a railroad, interurbans were more comfortable, more designed for passengers, and generally interurbans were electric, which meant that they weren't generating coal dust all over the place, so they were cleaner, more comfortable, quicker, more passenger-oriented, and that made us feel very urban. So we got our first one in 91, and then that one went through Lakewood, pretty much the same line that the W line of fast tracks follows now. And then in 1904, we got a second one that went through Arvada, approximately the route that I-70 and I-58 follow. And this was a depot that was downtown, right about where the Foss parking lot is on 13th Street, kind of across the street from Cafe 13 in the Armory. So tourism became a big thing starting in about 1900. It became a big thing at the national level when there was a conference where a bunch of railroads and other people interested in tourism got together and decided that they should encourage people to tour in the United States instead of going to Europe for the grand tour to get all polished. They decided they should position this as a patriotic thing, that you should tour the United States before going to some foreign clime. And so the railroads were very influential in this tourism campaign, because they had routes that would take you out to the new national parks that which were also being established at around the turn of the century. So after the sort of broad scale tourism was established, shorter line kinds of tourism were built. For instance, amusement parks in big cities. Somebody who wanted to develop an amusement park like Lakeside, which is what we're looking at with this picture, would talk to the tramway people, the streetcar company, and try and persuade them to build a route out there. And they would have to work on that together, because the developers didn't want to build an amusement park unless they knew there was a way for people to get to it. And the tramway people didn't want to build a line until they knew there was some reason for people to go there. So that was kind of the second wave of tourist attractions after the national parks, was local places like amusement parks. This, as I said, this was Lakeside Amusement, and Elitch Gardens was also kind of a tramway-oriented kind of amusement. Then after what I'm calling that second tier of tourism came along, places like Golden, that were not natural tourist attractions, began to think, how can we get in on this new industry? And people had always been inclined to come out to Golden and climb the mountains. This was as far west as you could get on the streetcar line. And if you wanted to get out to the mountains, this is where you would come. And so the people if you look at my cursor in this building, this was a hotel. They decided that they wanted to try building a resort on Castle Rock. And by resort, they didn't mean a place with a fancy hotel. They just meant a place with like a maybe a souvenir place, but a place you could go get refreshments, and they would have shade structures up there, and somehow they would make money off the fact that they had built something up there. They gave you a sort of destination aside from just getting to the top of the rock yourself. Now, the people in this hotel had a saloon, and so they certainly saw alcohol as part of being in the tourist business. They saw that as the major attractant that would get people to go to the top of Castle Rock. But because, although that was outside the city limits, because they were within a certain number of feet of the city limits, Golden got to vote on whether they were going to be given a liquor license to operate up there or not. And Golden said, no, we don't want that place to be turned into a saloon. And so once they lost their hope of having a liquor license, that family became uninterested in developing a resort up there. So another family bought it, the Quaintance family, bought the right to develop that as a tourist attraction. And they set it up so that they bought a string of burros, and they set it up so that you could take a burro ride to the top of Castle Rock. And they would meet people right at the end of right when they got off the streetcar on 13th Street, and say, get on my burro ride, and I'll show you a good time. And the Quaintances developing Castle Rock were not the only family trying to develop tourism out here. There was another, I guess it wasn't a family operation, there was a guy named Reese Fiddler who was trying to develop Lookout Mountain. And he also got a string of burros, and the two of them would meet the streetcars when they came into Golden, and they would both hawk their resorts and say, you should come over to my mountain because my mountain is close, it's very convenient, so get on my burros and I'll just take you right up there to the top of Castle Rock. And Fiddler would say, but that's such a short mountain, you should come to my mountain, you should come to Lookout Mountain, because you've come all this way and you don't want to go to a short mountain, you want to go to one with a really good view. So the two of them were in sharp competition, and Fiddler on Lookout Mountain thought of something really clever so that he would be a clear winner, clearly more attractive than Quaintance with Castle Rock. Fiddler, let's see if I can make it happen, built a funicular railway, which is, those are also called incline railways, and they go right up the side of a mountain. And that was vastly popular. And the summer he built that, which was 1912, the Denver newspapers were full of articles about how various groups came out to Golden. They would take the interurban out and they would get a ride on this funicular railway. And so conferences and conventions and all sorts of people came out here, which was, of course, pretty discouraging to the guy who owned the Castle Rock Resort. So this was 1912, and the next year, he built his own funicular railway over on Castle Rock. And this picture on the left is him at the top telling people about Golden down below. And the picture on the right shows that they had an electric line and they had electric lights going up the route of the funicular, and they had electric lights going all around the edge of Castle Rock. And they also had a searchlight going out there that would shine out to Denver. So these two funicular railways were quite popular for a very short amount of time, because at the same time, the two of them were very fixated on beating each other, on being the king of the incline railways. Another venture was going on, which was that Denver was building a set of mountain parks up in the mountains. And one of our locals, Bill Williams, decided that he would build this automobile road going up Lookout Mountain. So this is the Lariat Loop Trail. And then that became much more popular than the incline railways. There were a lot of ads put out by the Denver Tourism Bureau, I think it was, and they showed these people in very clean clothing, having gone to the top of the mountain by automobile. And that suddenly made incline railways seem a lot more old-fashioned and less desirable. In, I believe it was 1917, though I should look that up, Buffalo Bill died, and he was a superstar of his age. And people were kind of vying for the privilege of burying him, so that because they knew his grave was going to become a tourist attraction. And so through various means, which are still sort of debated as whether it was skullduggery or not, Denver Mountain Parks got him and planted him on top of Lookout Mountain. And this photograph on the right is a picture of the cars coming back from his funeral. And that picture was sent all over the world, and it became just an advertisement for what an easy way it is to get to the mountains. You could go up and you could visit the great man's grave, and you could see beautiful mountain scenery, and you could all do it all very easily by automobile. So Buffalo Bill became our ultimate tourist attraction, in death as he was in life. This is a picture of one of the Denver mountain parks. Actually, it's the one, Lookout Mountain Park, I think it's called, right up there by the Buffalo Bill Museum. And the thing that I always find interesting about this postcard is that it's got all these people having a picnic outside, enjoying nature and all that, but the automobiles are fairly prominently pictured in there. And I just find that interesting because I think now if we made a postcard of people having a picnic in a park, we would probably be cropping out the automobiles because we would see those as, well, not part of the picture of nature, but at that time it added to the coolness factor because they got there on top of a mountain by automobile. So many people did not own automobiles, of course, in 1920, but Bill Williams, the same guy who built the road, bought a fleet of Stanley steamers and other cars, and he would pick people up at the depot and he would take them to tourist places. He would take them to Lookout Mountain or Glenwood Springs or Mount Evans. So that was the business he was in. So automobiles then were helping and driving our tourist industry here in Golden. So the teens were going along nicely until the first of several bad things happened in the teens, and that was Prohibition. I put this picture of a James Cagney movie because that's how we tend to think of Prohibition based on our old film noir movies. We think of it as kind of an urban thing, but in fact, Colorado started Prohibition 4 years earlier than the rest of the country did. Prohibition went into effect here in Golden, in Colorado, in 1916. So that was a bad thing for a city that was largely dependent on Coors, a beer making place, as one of our major employers. So a good thing that came out of that was that we got an alternative industry, although the malted milk industry that they went into was not nearly as profitable and didn't require as many employees as making beer had. Another bad thing that happened during the teens was World War I. And the United States was late compared to Europe in getting involved in it. We didn't get in until 1917, but we went to a wartime economy and there was some privation on the home front. And obviously we were sending our youngsters over there to fight it. So that was bad. This is actually a picture of our celebration we held at the end of World War I. It was, the word came through that the war was over in the middle of the night, and people got out and began to clang on our fire bells and generally make noise until everyone in town gathered downtown on Washington Avenue and had a big impromptu celebration and a parade that they got up that they said stretched 6 blocks and was the best parade we had ever had. And so this is a great celebration of the end of World War I. But that ties in with the third really bad thing that happened during the teens, something we're all very aware of right now, which was the 1918 influenza epidemic. That was happening in, it was getting pretty bad in the fall of 1918. And eventually there were enough illnesses and then deaths that we had a statewide stay-at-home order. And that was in place everywhere, including Golden. And then it was beginning to look like things were getting better, the rates were slowing down, and so people were getting better. And so they removed the shutdown order on, I think it was the 9th of November. They removed it right before the armistice was declared for World War I. And that's why we were able to have this massive gathering. And there were massive gatherings like this all over the country. And so after that massive gathering, just a few days later, we had another explosion of cases of influenza because all those people got together and rubbed up against each other and breathed each other's air. And so the stay-at-home order went back into effect. And Golden did lose some people in that epidemic, including the original Mr. Foss, who started the Foss drugstore. He had come here in 1913 and he died in 1918. But his wife kept that store going. And then the second Mr. Foss took over when he became of age. So yeah, he was one of our prominent citizens that we lost. We also lost one of our aldermen, which is what we called city councilors at the time. But a good thing that came out of World War I was that Coors developed an alternative industry. Most of the scientific porcelain at that time was made by German companies. And when we got into World War I, our ability to trade with Germany was gone. And so we had this sudden great need for things like crucibles and mortars and pestles and all those things you used in chemistry class. And so Coors Porcelain geared up in a big way to start providing scientific porcelains. And Coors Porcelain has, became Coors Ceramics, and now it's Coors Tech. And they are a huge industry. Most of the things we make they make, I don't know about. Yeah, they go from obscure things in parts in refrigerators and cell phones and stuff to making parts of space shuttles to making body armor for soldiers. And so they've turned into just a massive industry, Coors Tech. And that all came out of World War I. Tourism did continue. We're getting into the 1920s now, and this is a parade down Washington Avenue, but I wanted to show you this building here that was built in the 19 teens, and that was our movie theater. Movies were beginning industry in the 19 teens, and we had a theater, and so that became a tourist attraction because a lot of the people who lived in our sphere of influence around here were rural, and this was the town you would come to if you were going to do something urban like go shopping. And so our theater was one of our tourist attractions, and also we had a swimming pool, which was in the building that is now the Buffalo Rose. They built a pool there in the 1920s, and that was also something that brought people into Golden. And that pool, in case you're interested, is still there in the basement of the Buffalo Rose. Obviously, it hasn't been filled with water for many years, but I got to go down into it a few years ago. You go behind the stage in the events center, there's a very steep stairway, and you're going into the bottom of the deep end of the pool. So at the bottom of the stairs, there's a drain there, just like you would see in the deep end of the pool, and then the floor slopes up towards Washington Avenue. And that was the Golden Plunge swimming pool. So those were still our tourist attractions. You would come to town and you would go to the theater, you would go shopping, you would go dining, and you could swim in our swimming pool. Because automobiles were becoming a big deal, automobile camping became popular in the 1920s. And this is a picture taken at a Denver park, but we had a campground, a city-owned campground here in Golden too. It was at 23rd Street and see, that's Jackson that goes out. If you've been here for a while, you may remember this as being the Big Tree Mobile Home Park as late as the 1990s and probably early 2000s. And at one point, the owners of the mobile home park decided they were going to build condos there. And so they kicked out all the mobile homes and they cut down all the trees. And then it stood there empty for several years. Eventually, this was turned into senior low-income housing. And so that's now Lewis Court. But that used to be our city campground. So the 1920s were a time of big self-improvement for the city. There were a lot of boosters, and that's when the Chamber of Commerce got started, which is why they're having their 100th anniversary this year. One of the first things that the Chamber of Commerce pushed was to pave Washington Avenue because it was still a dirt street at that time. And so it got paved. We built a new high school in 1920. And this is now the American Mountaineering Center, but it was built as our high school, and it was considered very modern and progressive in the 20s. We also developed Parpet Park at that time, across the street from the high school. That had been the town dump right there on the edge of Clear Creek. And so we civilized. We got a new high school, we got a park, and we got a paved street, which was followed by other paved streets in the vicinity of downtown. So a bad thing, very bad thing that happened in the 1920s was there was a sudden reemergence of the Ku Klux Klan, which had started after the Civil War and then was put down by Union forces during the Reconstruction era in the South. But then suddenly in about 1915, it had a resurgence, not all over the country. It wasn't just here in Colorado. It was actually based in Indiana. And unfortunately for Golden, the whole Denver metro area Ku Klux Klan decided they should have their meetings up on South Table Mountain on Castle Rock. And so they used to burn crosses up on Castle Rock. And there is a picture of a burning cross on Castle Rock. Not very popular with the locals, having this influx of, well, a hate group in the 1920s. Happily, the old resort buildings up there burned down in 1927. And that was about the same time that the Ku Klux Klan was sort of imploding for various reasons. They had a lot of, what's the word you use? Sorry, their leaders were stealing the money. But anyway, after a run of about 10 years, the Ku Klux Klan lost its popularity, and the buildings up on Castle Rock burned, and that made that a less attractive meeting place for the Klan. So that was the end of that era, happily for all. Beginning in the late 1920s, mostly in the early 1930s, the Depression set in. And I use this, although this is not a golden picture, it's just such a classic Depression picture that I knew that everybody would recognize it as the Depression. And so there are no pictures that I know of looking like this in Golden, where there were soup kitchens and bread lines and all that. But there was hardship in Golden. People were hungry, and there were relief efforts underway to feed people who had unemployed breadwinners or missing breadwinners. And so people were suffering during the Depression. There was also a lot of bootlegging because Prohibition was still in place. There was bootlegging within the city of Golden, but mostly it was in easier to hide places out in the mountains. This is a collection of stills behind the county sheriff's office. He would bring them in from the countryside after a raid, and he would break them up so that they couldn't be used anymore. Then, when Roosevelt came in, he repealed Prohibition. And so that was a good thing for us. If you read things that were written by the Coors Company, it sounds like there was 100% employment immediately and the Depression was over in Golden. That was a bit of an overstatement. Not everybody worked for Coors. It helped our local economy, but it didn't help everybody. So another thing that began to relieve Depression era circumstances was the WPA and all the various, that's the Works Progress Administration, all the various Roosevelt era programs where they would use government money to put people to work. And one of the things that came out of that was Berthoud Hall on the School of Mines campus. Steinhauer Fieldhouse was also built with government money. The Central School, which was on 12th Street, right across from the post office, and was just torn down maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. That was Mitchell Elementary School, and that was a WPA project, as was our post office, which was one of the last WPA projects. It was built in 1941. So those all helped with our employment situation. Red Rocks Amphitheater and Ralston Reservoir were also built at that time with government funds. This is a picture of the mural inside the post office, and that's a picture of building the road up Clear Creek Canyon, because also in the 1930s, the railroad, which had been running through Clear Creek Canyon, found that with competition from trucks and automobiles, it was no longer profitable to run that line that went out to Idaho Springs. And they petitioned and were allowed to discontinue the route into the mountains. So as soon as they pulled up their rails, we started building a highway through there for cars. And that again was a project done with WPA kind of funding. So all those things helped, the repeal of Prohibition and government projects. But of course, the thing that really ended the Depression was World War II, where suddenly There were jobs for every man, some women, even people who weren't soldiers or sailors or whatever, were able to get jobs in the munitions plants. And so there were other forms of suffering during World War II. There was a lot of rationing going on. There were many things you couldn't get. And of course, the greatest suffering was losing our young people to go over and fight overseas. This is a picture of Heine Foss in his World War II uniform. So we were suffering for other things, but we did have income because the people in the services were all making salaries, and people at home had plentiful jobs working in munitions plants. At the end of World War II, we had another big community celebration where everybody gathered out onto Washington Avenue and celebrated the end of the war. And I included this picture. I just wrote about this a few days ago in my daily email. I included this picture because it's a picture of Fred Robinson, who owned the bookstore, shooting off his little cannon as part of the end of war celebration. And this is a picture of him doing it at the end of World War I. But he also did it, he was still there, and he brought out his cannon again, and he also did it at the end of World War II to celebrate the end of World War II. After the war, Golden experienced a change like we had never experienced before, because with the GI Bill, we suddenly had a massive influx of people who came here to go to school at the Colorado School of Mines. But that's going to start at the beginning of the next lecture, and that's all I have for today. So are there any questions? Doesn't seem like it.
Okay, do we have any questions for Barb today? If so, just click the unmute button, which is in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, and go ahead and dive in.
I have a question. When did the pool close?
It closed in, I think, the early 1930s. It was a little bit uncertain, undefinitive that it was going to close, because the owners had always had a hard time making a living with it. And so at first they built a floor over it and decided that just for the winter they were going to close it and make it a roller skating rink. And so it served as a roller skating rink for a while. And then I think for at least one summer, they took that floor up and turned it into a pool again. And then they put the floor back again. And I think the economics just never worked out to open it as a pool again. And so it became a place with a big floor that was used for roller skating and dances and things like that. So 1930s sometime.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, I'd like to say first, thank you so much to Barb for a wonderful presentation again.
My pleasure.
And second, thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. Just a few FYIs, if you're interested in continuing to participate in these virtually golden sessions, goldenunited.org has the entire schedule as well as recordings of previous sessions available on the homepage under upcoming and recent events. We will be here every Tuesday and Thursday, noon until 12:30, and we've got a schedule booked out through the end of the month for now. If you do have more, or if you have ideas for additional virtually golden sessions, please feel free to reach out. You can email goldenunitedinfo@gmail.com with your ideas, and be sure and include your contact information. Kathy, did you have anything that you wanted to say before we wrapped up?
Sure. Thank you, Annie. Wanted to mention that Barb will be back next Tuesday for her final installment. Wonderful photos in this presentation, Barb. It was really interesting. And on Thursday at noon, we'll be hearing from Tyson Noeth, who's the executive director of Golden Backpack Program, and he's going to be telling us about the backpack program and also the Be Golden Fund. If you haven't heard about the Be Golden Fund, please go to Guiding Golden and read about it. It's a very worthwhile thing that's being done. So hope to see everyone on Thursday and next Tuesday.
Thanks all.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Bye. We'll be back on Thursday. Have a great rest of your day.